What's up, guys? Big stories coming from Budapest, Hungary after round 3 of the Chess Olympiad. And in fact, the whole story of day 3 did not start while the games were ongoing, but in fact before the games even started. So everybody at the Chess Olympiad is pretty much positioned in a completely different corner of Budapest. There are just simply too many players. We have about 2,000 players right now participating in the Chess Olympiad, and there are just simply not enough hotels for everybody around the city center. So Magnus, in fact, he's not staying at the same hotel as all of his other teammates. He's the only one at a different hotel, which is about 20 minutes away from the playing hall. Today was raining cats and dogs. It was very bad, very ugly weather outside. You needed pretty much an umbrella to walk 5 feet, 5 meters, whatever you're denominating your distance in. So everybody obviously was expecting to see Magnus at the board around 3 p.m. Local time when the games are about to start, but Magnus was nowhere to be found. And people started asking questions. It was already 3:05. The games were delayed. I don't think they were delayed necessarily because of Magnus, but the official transportation, the official buses were not at the venue yet. And obviously you cannot start the games if the official transportation has not arrived yet for the players. Now, fast forward 10 minutes, it was 3:15 after the start of the game. Start of the game happened at 3:05, around that time. 3:15, Magnus was still not there. And to be honest, if you're late more than 15 minutes, you forfeit your game. So you lose the game on the spot. Now, at this point, people start panicking. Where is Magnus? His teammates are looking at each other. They're really kind of incredulous about the situation they're in. Finally, Magnus is playing his first game and he's not showing up. So what happens? About 2-3 minutes later, with only, I believe, 2 minutes remaining before he forfeits his game, Magnus shows up. There's obviously the attention of the crowd focused at the person that's storming through the venue. It was Magnus. He takes his seat and he starts playing his game. Now, the official story, and we've listened to his interviews as well. He gave some interviews after. Apparently, what happened was due to the delays in the public transportation of the players, the Norwegian team was not able to get in time to the hotel, to Magnus's hotel, pick him up, and then all make it safely and in time to the playing hall. So they called Magnus, they told him, hey, we're going to be there at 2:55. But with 20 minutes distance between his hotel and the venue, the whole team would not make it by the 3:15 cut line. So basically what he said, go ahead without me, make it to the playing hall, start your respective games, and I'll find my way. And so he did. On a bike, he biked in the rain from his hotel about 20 minutes to the playing hall while navigating at the same time. And apparently in his interviews, he mentioned that the navigation was in fact the difficult part of this whole shenanigan. So quite a funny situation. Finally, Magnus makes it in the nick of time, plays his game, and let's take a look at what happened in the game. His opponent from Colombia, Roberto Pantoja, starts with the move e4, c5. Magnus, obviously, he's in a pretty combative state at this point. He's wet. Basically, all of his clothes, after pedaling in the rain for about 20 minutes, he's completely soaked in water. So at this point, he was just basically trying to warm up. e6, d4, take, a6, and we have a very typical Paulsen. I've played this opening my whole youth, and in fact, I had a coach specifically for this opening. Everything that we were doing, I was coming to training, and we were looking at games in this particular line. And I still don't know exactly how to play it, and to be honest, it depresses me. I don't like this opening. Bishop to e2, a b6, castle, bishop to b7. Obviously, you're trying to put some pressure in the center f3, but white has such a solid and so much space in the center and such a solid structure, the Marozzi structure with the pawns on e4 and c4. Knight to c6, we see a couple of exchanges, and now already Magnus is showing his intent, and that is to completely kill his opponent on the king side. h5, h4, bishop to d6, very important, try to create some panic along this diagonal and try to create a reaction, because after bishop d6, if you play g3, then obviously h4 is going to come and you're going to have huge problems. If you play h3, then all of the dark squares around the king are extremely weak. He plays bishop e3, bishop d6, f4, that's the reaction. The problem is that after the move f4, you're also allowing this pawn on e4 to become a big weakness in the position. Knight to g4, immediately Magnus is trying to take advantage of his opponent's last move, f4, e5, and bishop to e7. But the problem is with this few pawn moves, the last couple of pawn moves, f4 and then e5, is the fact that you overextended in the position as white. And I'm going to be able to pick up at your pawn structure. It's going to be problematic. I'm going to go d6, and everything, as we will see in just a couple of seconds, is going to explode. Bishop to d4, d6. Once again, Magnus is really trying to get to that pawn on f4 and create a reaction on the king side. Bishop to f3, but that just simply allows me to take on f3, queen to f3, and castle. Now, Magnus has a bunch of weaknesses that he's playing against. He's playing against the pawn on f4, but right now another weakness shows up on the board, and that is the pawn on c4. Knight to e4, queen takes c4, rook a to d1. And to be honest, I do feel that white has some initiative in the position. Obviously, knight takes d6 is a big problem. I also have ideas of h3, kicking the knight away, and then after knight to h6, most likely picking up the pawn on h5. Let's see how this game continued. Magnus needs to be very precise in order not to get himself in trouble. Bishop to e7, very good move. I really like this one because you're defending against any sort of sorties with the knight to a g5, getting closer to my king. None of that, not on my watch. b3, queen to b5, and a4. Hunting that queen on that side, but unfortunately for the player with the white pieces, Roberto Pantoja, is the fact that Magnus has a bunch of squares. You cannot go bishop to c3, continuing attacking my queen, because I just simply munch on the pawn on b3. h3, knight to h6, bishop to c3. He did not listen to me, as I've just explained my train of thought. After queen takes b3, the game is more or less over, for the simple fact that I have a lot of pawns, a lot of extra pawns, and you don't have enough compensation for it. Rook to d7, knight to f5, defending the bishop on e7, rook f to d1. Why not? Let's exchange some pieces, especially the rooks on the d file. The more pieces I exchange, the closer I will be to a winning advantage. g4, knight to h4, queen to e2, queen takes a4, and now, once again, huge problems against d7 and a bunch of extra pawns. Rook to d4, and the game is pretty much over at this point. From a technical perspective, Magnus, all he needs to do is not completely screw up or forget how to play chess. Rook to a7, take on g4, knight to g6, knight drops back, might as well focus on the last weakness in the position. Bishop to d6, queen to c1, the rest is just a formality. Bishop to c5, king to g2, knight to h4, beautiful way to finish things off. Queen to g1, you get the king on the third rank, and then you include the final piece into the attack with rook to d3. King to e2 and queen to d1 delivers the checkmate on the board. Just an incredible display of a very precise chess by Magnus. And this was the story of this game, which is, by the way, an amazing game to start off with for Magnus, given the circumstances. He was playing a very decent player, Roberto Pantoja. I mean, he's a grandmaster, about 25-50, playing with the white pieces. These type of players are not easy to dispatch of, and Magnus did so in style. I would say he never had any problems. Now, another big match that was happening, and to be honest, perhaps A very difficult clash on paper was the one between the United States, the rating favorites, for which obviously Fabiano is playing. Fabiano represents the United States. He's the leader of the team, number one. And right now they're facing Bulgaria, a very dangerous team with some reinforcements. Ivan Cheparinov on the first board, he was facing Fabiano. We will see that game in just a second. And of course, a very unexpected name on Team Bulgaria, and that was Arkady Naidic, who I believe played for about 4 federations throughout his Olympic career. Right now he's playing for Bulgaria. So let's take a look and see what happened in the game between Ivan Cheparinov and Fabiano Caruana. Fabi, with the black pieces, just like Magnus, decides to go for the Sicilian. And this is the cool thing about the Olympiad, is the fact that you're not going to see the typical Rui Lopez, the typical Joko pianos that the players at the top usually play when they play the closed invitationals between each other. We're going to see a lot of fighting chess at the Olympiad because everybody wants to win, Fabiano included. And Fabi always wants to win, to be honest. Every single game he plays in general, he's very ambitious. He's an ambitious player. And right now, Ivan Cheparinov probably thought that maybe with the white pieces, he at least needs to press, because on all the other boards, everybody was heavily outmatched in terms of rating. Knight to c6, bishop to b5, and e6. We have the Rossolimo with e6, castle, knight e7, immediately defending the knight on c6, rook to e1, and knight to d4. Not the move a6, which is the very typical response in this one, for the simple fact that once you do this, after the move d4, white is very quick in the center, and black is going to have some difficulties in this position. You take, I take back. If you continue taking and say that, look, I have the couple of bishops, the 2 bishops, unfortunately you have huge problems finishing your development. You move the bishop anywhere, you lose the pawn on g7. So you're going to have to lose some more tempis with f6, which creates a lot of weaknesses in the position. So that's not something that Fabi envisioned in his preparation. And in fact, he had this idea of knight to d4, which is a much more aggressive way of handling this position. Take on d4 and c3. a6, bishop to f1, and knight to c6. What I don't want as black is to take on c3 and allow you to take with the knight and then take full control of the center with d4. So now Ivan says, I need to force you to take on c3. So I'm going to go b4. It looks like a funny move. You don't generally play on that side. You don't generally create this pawn structure, but it has a clear plan in mind, and that is to go bishop to b2 and force a reaction. Because at that point, after bishop to d6, bishop to b2, you're going to force to do something about the pawn on d4. Are you going to take on c3? Probably. And that's exactly what he did. Take on c3, take with the pawn. Next move is going to be c4, and I'm going to open up my bishop. That's why Fabiano plays queen c7, forces a reaction with h3, castle, knight d2, and b6. a3, bishop to b7, and c4. At this point, it looks pretty decent for white. Nevertheless, from an objective point of view, it does seem like the opening phase has been quite a success for black. With the black pieces, generally want to equalize the game, and that's exactly what Fabiano did. I really like this maneuver. Bishop to h2, king to h1, and now bishop to e5. Now, you might wonder, why not bishop to e5 first? And in fact, I asked the same question because I see this maneuver quite often, but I never understood why. And Peter Svitler, who I'm doing commentary with, kind of explained to me, look, if we're ever going to go into an endgame, this king is going to be very far from the center, at least one tempo further from the center. So that's already a plus. Also, after the exchange of the bishops, you have some problems with the pawn on f2 without the king on g1. Enough problems that after the move a5, white realized and felt that he needs to go king to g1. He, in fact, needs that king on g1 to protect the pawn structure on the king side. Take on b4, and knight to e5. Queen to d4, a very natural move, you're just centralizing the queen, and at the right moment you're trying to go f4, even though f4 comes with consequences. You play f4, you're going to weaken the pawn structure. Once again, you're going to overextend, and we've seen very similar patterns in the previous game of Magnus versus Pantoja, the one that I just showed you. h6, rook to c1, knight to c6, queen to c3, take on a8, and rook to c8. Despite the fact that the position looks very even, and the material, in fact, is not as... the material is pretty limited right now. So it feels like white is at least very close to equality. But in fact, Fabi finds ways to poke at the opponent's structure and get an advantage. Let's see how. Queen to b2, d6, knight to d8, very cool maneuver, e5, rook to b8, and knight to e6. And finally, I'm getting my knight somewhere. I really like the last couple of moves from Fabiano. Bishop to f1, knight to d4, beautiful knight in the center, f3, bishop to c8, knight to c6. I do not want to exchange the knights. Bishop to e6. I want to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. h5, king to h1, h4, queen to c3, and finally the knight is coming back to f4 on a good square in the position. But it's still extremely difficult to create something right now. King to g7, bishop to f1. It feels like black has some sort of a blockade in the position. You would need to invade and to include this rook as well in the game, but unfortunately my rook on a1 is going to stay on the a file for the rest of the game. Rook to c8, b5, queen to d8. Fabiano is trying, he's really trying to poke and find a hole in his opponent's position. Knight to f4, rook to a7, rook to b8, and once again, we're seeing some shuffling of the pieces with not as much happening. Queen to g3 and king to g1. Of course, you don't want to take on g3, at least not right now, because then taking with the pawn would potentially be problematic. But at this point, you're forced. Why? Because I'm having a threat. Knight takes h3. If you allow me to do that, then obviously you resign on the spot. The only move in the position is to go queen takes g3. But now things get a bit complicated for white, because imagine a rook land on the first rank. You're basically checkmated after the move knight to e2. Bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, knight to e2, and you're in a checkmate situation. Knight to b2, defending, solidifying the defense of the pawn on c4, rook to b8, and I'm still trying to find a way, still trying to poke at the position and the structure. Bishop to c8, good move to not allow rook to a6 and the loss of the pawn on b6. Knight to c3, king to f6, time to bring the king potentially. Bishop to e6, knight to a4, king to h6. How am I getting to where I want to be? Rook to a6, good move, bishop to c8, and now a missed opportunity, but a very difficult opportunity for white. What he was supposed to do was take on b6, and this is not an easy decision because now you're allowing me access over the a file. But what he had to calculate was knight to c3, rook to a1. I'm still a couple of moves from finding the checkmate in the position. Rook takes d6, rook to c1. Now you have to basically give me potentially the piece or not. Knight to d1 would have saved right now white, and in fact it is white who has the better chances to find the advantage in this position. Nevertheless, still not an easy calculation because you go bishop to e6, I'm still threatening to take on c4. b6 is a forced move, and now I have to go bishop to c8. And we're basically going to stay like this. We're kind of in a blocked situation. c5, bishop to b7, and there's no way to create anything in the position for either side. Rook to d7, bishop to c6, rook to d6, bishop to b7, things of this nature. Maybe black can still try to do something with king to g7, but it's not easy. Now, going back to the game continuation, instead of rook to b6, perhaps the final chance for white, rook to a7 came, and after f5 things are becoming extremely difficult. King to g5, the king gets active, goes to h4, and you will see that king on h4 is in fact quite useful. Knight to a4, bishop to c8, double question mark, because he had a winning move, and that was d5. He did not find it. The idea of d5 is that you take, D takes c4, knight takes c4, rook takes b5, and now it's very difficult to defend the first rank. After rook to a1, unfortunately, I will just simply go bishop to d3, and this is a very good transition. Again, you're completely stuck on the first rank defending the king. You move the rook from the first rank, you get instantaneously checkmated. This would be a win for black, or at least a winning position for black, but it's still not as clear. You have some problems with the pawn on g2, which most likely I will take advantage of. Now, he did not want to stay passive, and he played bishop to c8, rook to a7, king to g5 back, knight to c3, bishop to b7, and bishop to e2. And this happened with a few seconds on the clock. Obviously a huge mistake. We will understand in just a second why. But the key idea that the only move in the position was in fact to go rook to a4, perhaps knight to a4 as well, but rook to a4 would have been the best solution. And what I need to do is stop you from going d5. Once you go d5, I will take, and after rook to c8, I'm going to answer with the move a rook to c4. That's probably happening before or after knight to e4. But the idea of having the rook on the fourth rank is that I want to cover your entry with a rook to c4. Quite a cool concept, but a very difficult one to see, especially with so low time on the clock. And he played bishop to e2, and after d5, I'm opening up the c file, I'm breaking through, and the knight, in fact, is overloaded with the defense of the bishop on e2. Take a rook to c8, knight to e4, king to h4, and in fact, he just simply resigned because you are one move away from delivering the checkmate. I play any other move but rook to c1, and I'm getting checkmated. Unfortunately for white, for Ivan Cheparinov, rook to c1, bishop f1, knight to e2 check, everything with tempo, and a rook takes f1, and this would be all she wrote. But of course, Ivan is such a strong player, he understood that immediately after king to h4, he resigned. Now, with this victory, Fabiano Caruana, Fabi, our boy, is finally back over 2800. And in fact, not only that, but he has surpassed Hikaru Nakamura for the second position in the world. And that is a big development in the world of chess, because second position after Magnus, not an easy feat. And with so many games in the books potentially, and so much rating still at stake for the remainder of the tournament, which is another 8 rounds, anything can happen. Well, we're going to be here to give you all the big inside scoops, and be on the lookout. We're going to have some fun vlogs coming up as well, potentially even tomorrow. So definitely, if you're here for the first time, even if you are not here for the first time, like, subscribe, hit the notification button. That's very important, because then you're not going to miss anything. And until then, see ya in the next video. Bye-bye.